this presentation on near-death experiences that is brought to you today by First Presbyterian Church of Elizabethton, Tennessee. We are a progressive, inclusive Presbyterian church located in Elizabethton, Tennessee. I feel like I'm being redundant. More specifically, we are at 119 West F Street in Elizabethton. We have a website where you can find out more about us, and it is fpcelizabethton.org. Easy to find that through Google. We hold traditional Sunday services here in the church at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. We have an adult Sunday school class that meets at 9:45. And I will mention that we have discussed this topic of near-death experiences on 3 occasions in our adult Sunday school class. I mentioned that we are a progressive church. We are inclusive. Our motto is arms open wide. And we like to live that out. I want to start by, to try to encapsulate who we are in 2 scriptural verses that I think are consistent with who we are and the theme of today's presentation. The first is from 1 John chapter 4. You will have heard this, that God is love. And he or whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. And the second one is from Micah verse 6:8, which just disappeared from my screen. I can pretty much memorize this one. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and act kindly and walk humbly with your God. Yeah, that always gets an endorsement there. But we quote that frequently in the church. And with that, that's who we are. And Ginger's going to do the introduction to the presentation.
Thank you very much and welcome, and thank you all for coming today. I'm very grateful for that. Our speakers today are Mr. Joseph Cashow and Pastor Vernon Baumgartner. Joseph sits on the board for the Near Death Experience Research Foundation that's based in Rolling Meadows, Illinois. He's been a board member since 2018, and he has been working for he worked for the foundation several years before that. Mr. Cashow has a love of science and technology, especially in fields of physics and neurology of free will and consciousness. He's a musician, playing the guitar, and he writes songs as a creative process somewhere in the basement of his house, I'm told. Mr. Cashow has a strong knowledge base of Jesus's teachings and a good working knowledge of theology that has guided his life. He and his wife, Laura, have been married for 25 years, and they have a son. Pastor Vernon Baumgartner has been a minister since 1984, and he'll be our second speaker after the break. After his near-death experience, he left his business of 20 years, and he began ministerial studies to be ordained in 1984. He has led adult education, men's groups, been an assistant pastor for 10 years, led an online ministry for 12 years, and he has been a staff counselor for a 4,000-member Presbyterian church, and he has served as commissioner for Rancho Mirage in California for 7 years. He and his wife, Peggy, a few weeks ago, I understand, celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary. He is a volunteer with Near Death Research Foundation. Now, behind the scenes, and somebody that has been just very powerful and has become my friend, is Stacy Long. She lives in Des Moines, Iowa. She's a volunteer with the Near Death Research Foundation. She's a mother of 2 daughters in her 20s, and she's worked in the healthcare world for a number of years. She's been a godsend to me for her support in working out details and presenting this program for our church. We discovered several synchronicities, shared interests, and she actually lived in the same city where my Poteet ancestors began their pioneer experience. So I'm grateful for these 3 individuals to present our program today and the willingness to share their knowledge. The Christian Education Committee also appreciates members such as David and Brian and Wally especially too for assistance in getting this program started. So to start with a quote, which is our tradition, to get us kind of on a mindset. This quote is from Dr. Jerry Wright, Presbyterian minister, author, teacher, traveler, husband, father, grandfather, and a very nice human being gave me permission to read this today. As finite beings in an infinite cosmos, perhaps the greatest puzzle of all is the mystery of the human psyche, the mystery we are to ourselves. That puzzle demands our primary attention since it governs all that we think, feel, know, and choose. The health of our world, including our religions, depends on the health of the human psyche and the human soul. Thank you. Joseph.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here. It's arguably the most transformative human experience known to mankind. And paradoxically, this positive, life-changing experience comes after life-threatening traumas or actual clinical death. And it's inspired people all over the world. Today, we're going to be talking about near-death experiences.
As I breathe my last breath, I saw a light. In that moment, time stood still. Near-death experience, a journey profound. Life-changing moment, my soul unbound. Transcending the physical, reaching for the divine. Is song and wisdom within me to shine. I saw my life flash before my eyes. All the joy, the pain, the truth and lies. A second chance, a renewed sense of purpose. I've been reborn, my spirit anew. Near-death experience, a journey.
And that's the near-death experience zone. Good morning. My name is Joseph Cascio. I have the honor of working in affiliation with Dr. Jeffrey and Jody Long, the founders of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, or NDERF as we like to call it for short. Can you guys hear me okay? Am I coming through? Great. For over 25 years, Dr. Long has amassed the largest publicly available database of NDEs, portions of which have been translated in over 20 languages, as contributors from every corner of the globe continue to share their amazing experiences and stories with us. It's all freely available at nderf.org. I'd like to thank you also for the opportunity to speak here, and I acknowledge Ginger and Stacy in particular. They have worked very hard in trying to put this event together, and I can't thank them enough. So I can say without question that the passion of my heart is to bring the knowledge of near-death experiences to religious communities and houses of faith like this. It's because these experiences and the research surrounding them offer evidence-based data for the existence of the soul, often importing the language of spirituality itself that is consistent with core Christian concepts. However, as I speak of my conclusions in relationship to faith, understand that they may not necessarily reflect those of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation or that of Dr. Jeffrey Long. So, knock, my friends, and you shall find. These accounts are not as rare as you may think. Millions in the United States alone, and likely tens of millions of people have experienced NDEs globally. Dr. Long is often heard saying, what is real is consistently observed. And the data that is currently being observed at NDERF by the thousands conforms to this idea that consciousness is separable from the body and survives bodily death. Our findings here also conform to other rigorous and focused studies of NDEs over the decades since Dr. Raymond Moody coined the term NDE in his book, Life After Life. Research, education, and support is at the very heart of our global mission at NDERF. In this introductory presentation, we're going to explore what a near-death experience is, their common elements, and the exciting research results behind them in a compelling way, as I said, that evidences self-consciousness separable from the body, or the soul, if you will. But I certainly don't want to impose my views on anyone, so let's take a look at this fascinating area together so that you can come to your own conclusions. Defining our terms is an important first step to deepening our understanding of any new topic. And while NDEs encompass a range of experiences, the definition provided by Dr. Long provides valuable insights by capturing their essential features. So let's read it. A lucid experience associated with perceived consciousness apart from the body, occurring at a time of actual or threatened imminent death. That's what a near-death experience is. Notice the three parts of the definition: a lucid experience, perceived consciousness apart from the body, and it's occurring at a time of actual or threatened imminent death. You should know that only about 10 to 20% of people who experience such physical traumas or cardiac arrests have an NDE, and we can't currently predict who will have one. What is the nature of the consciousness, right? So that's at the heart of that definition during an NDE. If people are reporting a conscious experience during a time when it would seem impossible, what are the experiencers themselves saying about it? In Dr. Long's most recent survey results of over 830 NDEs, he found that 95% described their consciousness and alertness during the NDE as real or more real than waking reality, with the vast majority, as you can see there, almost 80%, indicating that it was more real. In order to understand NDEs, it's good to understand their consistent elements. And you'll hear that term talked about a lot, but what are they? They're simply the recurring patterns that highlight very specific features or characteristics that are noteworthy. And these consistent features are what we call elements of the experience. There are three broad categories that can help us concisely think about the elements that are reported in NDEs. The first one is a sense of separation from the body, then movements and encounters with beings or landscapes. That's in relation to usually the deeper parts of the experience, and then the after effects of the experience. So notice the first two speak of actual perceptions usually occurring during the experience, whereas the third category, the after effects, focuses on those effects that people carry with them following their NDE. Okay, we're going to start with the soul-body distinction. It's not a term used by other researchers. The more common phrase is out-of-body experience, and we'll touch on that too. But the reason I like to use the word soul-body distinction, or the phrase, is because it's more comprehensive and can be realized without experiencing visual observations that are often associated with the term out-of-body experience, as we'll be defining it. So I choose the word soul here because it fits both with that physical aspect of self, like the psyche as understood in psychology, and because the soul is commonly understood in its non-physical terms as our essence or the seat of consciousness in philosophy and, of course, many faiths. Let's take a look at how this element is reported to us. So we'll be hearing from Vern, a retired pastor, a little later. The catalyst for his NDE was a life-threatening reaction and convulsions after stopping medications that his physician said could kill him. And he indicated, "I felt myself going through a tunnel of sorts and was ultimately deposited in a totally dark place. Somehow I knew I had arrived." Here's Wesley. This was due to a severe head injury from a motor vehicle accident. Wesley was unconscious with severe head injury in a truck that was on fire after the accident. He says, "The next thing I know, I was somewhere else, but in the same place. This place existed outside of time and our reality, yet I was still in the truck. I heard someone speaking to me, and he told me not to be afraid. I was not frightened. I felt whole for the first time." Notice that clear sense of self-consciousness he's got, that he was in another place, and yet he's cognizant of the fact that his physical body is still in the truck. This sense of separation we're talking about here. Notice the calmness as well. I was not frightened, he says. I felt whole for the first time. This is pretty amazing considering her circumstances. Wesley indicates his, by the way, his level of consciousness and alertness as being higher than normal during his NDE, same as with Pastor Vern. Okay, before we go on, I want to bring back the definition of elements categories. The next slide will include an important 7-minute video that illustrates the sense of separation apart from the body. It will also hit on all the aspects of the definition and element categories in one way or another. So pay attention to that. We're going to try to make this interactive a little bit, so I will have some videos. This will be the longest one in the presentation, but I think it'll break it up and bring some other context to what we're teaching. Okay, you're about to watch a video of a medical doctor, Bob, who after a heart attack dies at the emergency room of the hospital he works at. You're going to hear the interplay between what he experienced as a patient after he died, in his own words, and the resuscitation efforts of the emergency room physician, in his own words, while Bob was clinically dead.
Being wheeled in on the gurney was a boundary crossing experience because I went from being a doctor to being a patient.
We were going about our normal activity, taking care of other patients, and all of a sudden we realized that Bob is here, and the rush of adrenaline was pronounced, knowing that we have a fellow colleague that we need to take care of. Usually we try to get an electrocardiogram immediately upon arrival, which we did. The electrocardiogram was classic for an acute myocardial infarction, meaning that he was having a heart attack.
I realized that I was having a heart attack, a medical condition that I assumed was going to be treated. I didn't really think that I could die.
Gave him medications, and he was feeling better. I remember he was feeling well.
All of a sudden, I start hearing this sound. And it was the sound, it sounded like cicadas. Meanwhile, Dave's looking a little anxious. And he said, don't worry, Bob, don't worry. That's just the sound that some people hear when we give them lidocaine. So I thought to myself, oh, lidocaine. I must be having an arrhythmia. And that was it. That was my last thought.
And then all of a sudden he goes out on us. There's no pumping function, there's no blood flow to the brain or vital organs. And basically the heart stopped. The race to get him back began.
I'm in another world at that point. The most striking thing was a sense of waking up.
We lose the pulse. He stops breathing. Life functions are non-existent.
When I was in this space, I did not know that I was dead. I felt alive.
Shocked him the first time, there was no effect. We continued with CPR and chest compressions.
There was a sense of, visually, of being in a dark space, which was also illuminated. The best description I would have of this black tunnel is a really clear night sky, you know, where you can really see the stars and everything. There's no body involved here. There's just the pure movement with that, and so it kind of has the feeling of flying.
We shocked him again. There was still no change.
there was 3 lights. And the lights were kind of like stars, but in that state, I felt that they were figures. They were like conscious, or sentient somehow. It just came to me immediately who they were. That one was my father, who had died 2 years before this. One was that my friend who had died 2 years before that. And one was the young man who had died the week before. I thought that they were there to welcome me to wherever the soul goes after you die. I think of it as divine. You know, I mean, as a rational medical doctor person, using those words is not that easy for me to do, but that's it. I mean, there was a sense of sacredness.
After we did the 3rd shock on Bob, he basically opened his eyes. He was awake.
The next thing I know, Dave, the emergency room doctor, is about 3 or 4 inches from my face. He's got tears in his eyes. He looks really upset.
The emotional impact of him coming back and being with us was very emotional for me. Unlike other patients that I have worked on in this situation, he knew me immediately. His whole look of surprise that I was even there just overwhelmed me to the point where, I said, "Bob, did you see the white light?"
And I'm looking at him smiling, and I said, "No, but I was going up the black tunnel." Then it kind of hit me what had happened. Something changed in my life then. Something changed. I had been kind of having a sort of midlife crisis. And it was kind of like a feeling of disillusionment. It all got resolved through this experience.
He was dead for 15 minutes. His heart was not beating for 15 minutes. He was having a real life or real death experience. The people that he's touched and shared this experience with, they for sure are getting a tremendous benefit from knowing his experience.
Bob eventually started working with hospice patients. And these after effects, again, come out in very profound ways. It's not just a research or a study about near-death experiences. It's about how near-death experiences affect humanity and how humanity can impact the world. So I hope you're getting the significance of this particular account, though. We have the last words of an NDE experiencer, a physician himself, at the very moment he died, being attended to by the emergency room physician who spent 15 minutes trying to revive him, and who was there when he had his first words after Bob had recovered or was resuscitated. And it was during that period, from the last moment he remembered going out to the first moment when he was resuscitated, a period of cardiac arrest, clinical death, when there should have been no possibility of any brain-induced consciousness, that he conveys cohesive memory formations and recounts a rich and lucid conscious experience apart from his physical body. This brings us to the out-of-body experience. So the out-of-body experience, as defined here, is effectively that sense of separation, but where there are visual observations being reported during the experience, they're still within the perceptive domain of our physical reality. In other words, when an experiencer is seeing, when they're feeling the sense, this perceived sense of separation, what they're seeing and hearing are things happening here in this world. They may see their family in waiting rooms at the hospital, paramedics or doctors frantically working on them to revive them, and things like this. Sometimes they report seeing events happening far away from the location of the body. So what is an out-of-body experience? As defined here, it refers to observations that correspond to reality and yet remain and are made at a time and from a position that is inconsistent from the state and location of the physical body. Let me say that again. It refers the visual observations here that they make are observations that correspond to reality and yet are made at a time and from a position that is inconsistent from the state and location of the physical body. It's an absolutely amazing claim that initially sounds quite ludicrous, actually. About 45% of NDE experiencers have this visual awareness, while 55% of experiencers have this just soul-body separation that we looked at earlier, where consciousness is apart from the body, but with no perceptive, without being in the perceptive domain of this physical earthly reality. So let's take a look at some examples. Here we have Cale. Cale had encephalitis, and he states that he experienced a grand mal seizure in his upstairs bedroom. His spirit floated to the ceiling. My stepfather and mother, who were entertaining, frantically raced up the steps. In a panic, my stepfather scooped my body up out of the bed, and I calmly watched from the ceiling. Then to the south window as I watched my parents rush to the station wagon in the driveway. Pat handed me to Mom and ran around to drive. I had no legs, but that didn't cause any panic. I was flying, and that caused no panic. Everyone else was going nuts, and that caused no panic. So notice Cale's having an out-of-body experience with visual observations within the domain of this physical reality. He claims to have watched his parents take his body from the bed to the car and drive off. They're very clear, coherent, realistic observations in a manner, again, where he's in a very frightening situation physically. Julia, this was a clinical death from a cervical tear. I went out of my body, surrounded by total love, compassion, and pureness that is hard to put into words. When my husband came back into the room, my body was ice cold and white as a sheet. The doctor came into the room and he started yelling at the nurses, fluids, get a pressure, get a pulse. I could see them from a place a bit distant from my body, like I was floating in the room. I just felt so good. I did not want to go back into that body. It didn't seem to belong to me. So Julia continued. Then I heard someone else talking to me. I knew it was the presence or feeling of God telling me that it was not my time to come to this beautiful, loving place. I had 2 children to take care of. I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay in this all-encompassing love, yet I knew I loved my children and they needed a mother, but I was so torn. I did not want to go back, but I felt pushed back down or nudged. Go, little one, go back. It's not your time. I go back to this phrase that Julia used, go, little one, go back. There's a sense of parental support that's described over and over again in NDEs. And within this overwhelming sense of love, unity, or oneness, there's also clear authority. People are lovingly sent back, sometimes despite their strong objections. Now, from a Christian perspective, doesn't this invoke the image of God as a father in his strength and support, of a nurturing mother? These are real experiences that can help us bridge theological concepts to the modern world and bring understanding to these purported spiritual experiences. Pastor Vern likes to describe our sojourn here as a life school. And I think these pictures say it all, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. You'll come back home when school is out, when the race is finished. You have work to do a good job, do the best you can, and I love you. That's what we're hearing from the formal research as well as the stories of near-death experiencers. But it's amazing enough to have consciousness during a time when you shouldn't be having it. it's more amazing that you're making, or you claim to be making, visual observations of things happening here in this earthly domain. But do those perceptions and visual observations correspond to reality? Are they accurate? Are they making accurate observations apart from their bodies? What does the research say? In 2001, the largest peer-reviewed study of near-death experience at the time was led by Dr. Pim van Lommel and published in The Lancet, one of the world's most prestigious medical journals. They reviewed 344 patients who suffered cardiac arrest, meaning their heart stopped, and they effectively died. After being resuscitated, they found 41 patients, about 12% had an NDE. On the screen is the story of one of those patients who had reported an out-of-body experience with the visual observations that were confirmed accurate at a time and from a position that was completely inconsistent with the state and location of his lifeless body. So here we see a 44-year-old cyanotic man. They begin defibrillation, heart massage. A nurse removes his dentures and put in a drawer in a crash cart in order to intubate the patient. And after recovering from a coma a week later, the man accurately describes the resuscitation scene, where the dentures were placed, and the nurse who took them out. He explains that the observations were made from a position above his body. This video is taken from a special by the BBC on NDEs, and in this 2-minute clip, we'll hear the doctor explain this case in his own words.
Hundreds of miles away in Holland, Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist at the Rijnstater Hospital in Arnhem, was also using the same kind of control conditions in which to study near-death experiences in cardiac arrest patients. Dr. van Lommel and his research team talked to over 300 cardiac arrest survivors within 2 days of their heart attack. They found that 41 of them reported having had one. One of the patients in Dr. van Lommel's study was a man who'd been found in a meadow, having suffered a heart attack. He was brought to hospital where the medical team carried out extensive cardiopulmonary resuscitation, during which time he displayed all 3 signs of clinical death. His heart and breathing had stopped, and his pupils dilated.
Those dentures are for me, please.
Shocking!
When the patient was stabilized, he remained in a coma for 1 week.
And after 1 week, he came back on the cardiac ward, and the nurse who was there during the resuscitation came in for the first time to give him medication, and the patient said, "You were the one who was there when I was brought in."
You were there when they brought me into the hospital. You took the dentures out of my mouth and put them on that cart. It had all these bottles on it. There was a sliding drawer underneath, and there you put my teeth.
And the nurse was flabbergasted. He said, "This is not possible. Possibly this patient was in deep coma, couldn't see anything." But the patient told him that he could see everything from above his body. And he could see the doctors and the nurses what they done. So during the period of coma, he could perceive in a position out and above his body.
Astounding. Confirmed visual observation at a point in time that would be impossible otherwise. In 2014, the largest peer-reviewed study of near-death experiences at the time was led by Dr. Sam Parnia. It spanned 25 hospitals in the United States, United Kingdom, and Austria. They also reviewed patients who had died from cardiac arrest, and out of the 101 patients who completed the 2-stage interview, they found that 9% of them reported having an NDE. Quoting from the study itself, 2% described awareness with explicit recall of seeing and hearing actual events. 1 had a period of verifiable period of conscious awareness. It was a 57-year-old man described the perception, observing events from the top corner of the room. He accurately described people, sounds, and activities from his resuscitation. It was estimated that our patient maintained awareness for a number of minutes into cardiac arrest. And folks, that awareness corresponded to a 3-minute period after his heart stopped, after he died. Confirmed visual awareness. Here's an excerpt from that man. I was talking to the nurse, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. I can remember vividly an automated voice saying, "Shock the patient, shock the patient." And that was the defibrillator. Up in the corner was a woman beckoning me. I felt I could trust her. And the next second I was up there looking down at me, the nurse, and another man who had a bald head. I couldn't see his face, but I could see the back of his body. He was quite chunky, he had blue scrubs on, he had blue hat, but I could tell he didn't have any hair because of where the hat was. Here's some more quotes. Notice there that the nurse he did not know beforehand and then saw afterwards, as he says, very, very similar and resonates with Dr. Pim van Lommel's study. All right. What kind of conclusions can we conclude? People are saying they see things in this real world at a time that's impossible. That's getting confirmed by research. What can we conclude? If self-consciousness can be absent from a living body and self-consciousness can be present in a dead body or present outside the unconscious body, then self-consciousness is not solely dependent on the body. So let me ask you this. Maybe we can make this interactive. If not, I'll just kind of answer the question. When is our consciousness absent from a living body? Can you think of when that might be the case? It happens most every night, doesn't it? How about when we sleep? If someone comes into your room while you're sleeping, you would have no visual observations to make. No memories formed of specific events going on in the room while you're sleeping. That just doesn't happen. And your brain is fully functional. You are a perfectly healthy individual, yet there is no consciousness of this physical reality here on Earth. Similarly, if you're clinically dead or in a coma or otherwise completely unconscious due to a life-threatening trauma, and you have accurate conscious visual awareness, which is reported more real than waking consciousness, if you remember, then self-consciousness is not dependent on the body. Is this proof of the soul? I'll leave that up to you. But we're going to continue.
The physicalist approach to consciousness, which says that brain activity causes consciousness, does face a problem with the new empirical results that we're getting from resuscitation of patients after an hour of no brain activity. And these patients routinely are reporting very, very clear conscious experiences, seeing a white light, a tunnel, a life review, and so forth. And so all of the physicalist theories of how brain activity could cause conscious experiences are completely incapable of explaining these conscious experiences.
There is a huge element of unknowns around this question of what is happening at the time of cardiac arrest, and when people are doing CPR on somebody's body, where is that person's consciousness? What is happening then? And people frequently come out after an event like that and can describe things that were happening in the room, can describe vivid experiences and memories that they were having. And this goes against everything that we know about how brains function.
Even the scientists are struggling. Are there any other reasonable conclusions that can account for these facts other than consciousness separable from the body, the soul, if you will? It is an earth-shattering moment, I believe. Truth doesn't require our belief. It is what it is, irrespective of what any of us believe about it. Once upon a time, a lot of people thought the earth was flat. The earth's spherical shape Again, doesn't change based on anyone's belief. But we do change our beliefs. We change our beliefs when there's evidence, when there's data. We want to push that information, that evidence, and that those stories and those research accounts out to the public. And that's what we're trying to do here. All right, let's move on. We're going to go into the movements and tunnel experience. These are really two separate items, but where there's a tunnel, there's usually movement. And that movement can be described as sensations of weightlessness, floating, or other motion, often through a tunnel, void, or space at accelerating speeds and usually towards a brightening light. The light at the end of the tunnel, as it were. The movement and tunnel experience is one that seems arbitrary in so much that people may report moving through the tunnel on their way and coming back from a deeper part of their experience, while others may report moving through a tunnel in one direction, but not in another. And yet others report no such experience and find themselves in the midst of a deeper part of their NDE instantly. Here's Pastor Byrne again. I felt myself going through a tunnel. This is Rachel. She gives us a little more helpful detail of both. She had a very deep experience and a severe reaction during a blood transfusion after her childbirth. I briefly hovered over my newborn baby, hoped she'd remember me. Then I was traveling. It felt like I was shooting through a tunnel, but I couldn't see any sides to it. It was dark but illuminated. I was not alone. I could sense a presence with me. I was tumbling forward, upward, in unfathomable speed, and it felt like the wind all through me, inside of me. I likened it to that age to being on a roller coaster, that rushing feeling. It was wonderful. All right, next, light and love. In a text analysis of accounts at the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, the three most commonly used words were light, love, and God. Proportional to the depth of the experience, light is reported as an encounter versus an observation of light. It appears the experience of light is almost always associated with a living being. And love is closely, almost inextricably linked with reports of the light, as the light seems to always be emanating love or other positive emotions. The fact is, the intensity of these pleasant feelings, which are overwhelming to begin with, appear to be even more overwhelming and proportional to the proximity and or the brightness of the light. So the brighter the light, the greater the love, so to speak. Beings encountered there are also generally in the form of light, like the star that we just heard earlier. Even when they do have the shape or appearance of a human body, there's a radiance or self-luminescent quality to it. And at times, it's been said that it makes harder for people to recognize or discern distinctive features of the individual because of the light emanating from their face or body. The brightness of the light is often described with such high intensity. I mean, people will say that it's compared to the sun. It was like the sun, but many times brighter. And when there's description of landscapes, similarly, it's not unusual that light appears to permeate or emanate from everything. I can think of a scripture for that one. Interestingly, you'll sometimes hear that the light tends to have a tangible substance to it, such as being embraced by the light or likening it to being submerged in water, with the water all around you, touching you, again, in this case, the light. The light presence often fills the individual with profound sense of unity, a real deep connection or oneness with the light, and really everything else. That lasting impression of oneness in this eternal sense is that we're all connected, is something that they tend to bring back with them and really bring into their value and belief system very strongly. Now, though you don't often hear it discussed much, it should be noted that light or light beings carry an unmistakable level of authority with it, as many experiencers, as I mentioned earlier, are returned to their bodies despite not wanting to return, as we saw with Julia, I think it was. There's Pastor Byrne again. Suddenly, a tiny starlight-like appeared in the far distance darkness, growing rapidly until a man stepped out of it. He said, "I love you." light, and love. Rachel again. We traveled through this illuminated darkness until I saw a pinpoint of light in the distance. We moved faster and faster towards the beam of light. I felt like I was flying. We burst into it, and it was indescribable. It was immediate peace. I felt completely accepted, totally whole and loved beyond comprehension, love I've not felt before, loved with the purest love there can be. I was at home. I merged with the light. We became one, and a conversation began. And this type of ecstatic descriptions of love and light is not unusual, especially in cases where there's this merging or union with the light. Again, something that has deep connection with religious mystics in history. Darkness versus distressing. Darkness is not uncommon and often appears as a void or transition into a deeper part of a typical pleasant NDE. And while this darkness is usually neutral, some individuals feel fear, even though there's no stated external cause for that fear. While that can be distressing to them, that's quite different from distressing NDEs as they're typically discussed. I'd be remiss not to mention these. The reality is pleasant NDEs are so powerful and positive that many experiencers may conclude that there is no hell, it can't exist. And while that's a comforting idea and holds true for the vast majority of experiencers, I would say, it's important to recognize that distressing NDEs, though rare, are consistently reported. They make up around 10% of NDEs, and unlike the usual peaceful elements, distressing ones may involve intense fear or encounters of threatening entities or environments, sometimes through classic hellish imagery. And though those experiences are even less frequent at only 2%. Many of these experiences do have a silver lining, though, a rescue upon a call for help. And although they may leave lasting emotional impacts on the individuals, there is no physical harm to them. So despite their intensity, there's potential for transformative insight with implications to shape their own personal life and beliefs. And again, this is why it's so important to understand NDEs not through your own experience. It's very easy to do that when you have one because it's so powerful, but to take that information that you've learned and experienced and how it's affecting you and read and study about the greater experiences of others so you can make a proper assessment of it. Each one may say, this is what an NDE is, but when you put all of them together, the whole view of NDEs and this afterlife experience tends to be understood with more detail. So we encourage such individuals who have any experience, including distressing ones, to reach out and share their accounts with us, if necessary, to seek out support from healthcare professionals. Okay, compared to everyday waking consciousness, the state of consciousness in NDEs is often described in both its similar and contrasting qualities. In fact, this is really interesting to me. It may take some time for an experiencer to eventually realize they actually died. Why? Because their consciousness is continuing. What does that tell you? It tells you that at face value, this is really important, the sense of self and the ability to think and reason in the purported afterlife is very much the same of how we think and reason in this life. That's where the similarities end. As soon as you get deeper into the NDE, there seems to be a divergence in how consciousness operates. There are additional abilities that is described as expanded or enhanced consciousness. It's a preferred state of being, as you're hearing. And such expanded consciousness may include clear and instant means of communication, heightened levels of awareness, and abilities that are so radically different to the way waking consciousness operates that they become evidential of the reality of these reported elements through the consistencies that they have. So brain-induced phenomenon, such as hallucinations and delusions, have no such consistencies between them. These may also include a hyper-real environment with colors and sounds beyond the spectrum of our human ability to see and hear. Dual or multi-consciousness, including the ability to clearly perceive and understand multiple sources of input simultaneously, and the quality of that timelessness or distorted sense of time relative to normal earthly time. Notice the quote here, I had 360-degree vision. which is commonly reported. I often try to sort of help people imagine that. Imagine you walked around with a bag over your head with one little hole in front of it. And imagine the whole human race lived life and visualized that way. A near-death experience would be akin from a visual standpoint to someone pulling the bag off your head. All of a sudden you have this wide, pie-shaped field of view that how would you describe that? It's ineffable. It is something that's without words. Nancy states a similar type of quality. My consciousness was in two places simultaneously. She called it dual consciousness, but this idea that multiple streams of awareness are experienced simultaneously is very common. It's very evident in the life reviews, especially, which we'll touch on. Communication and memory are two aspects of expanded consciousness that are worth noting. We'll move quickly through these though. In near-death experiences, the proportional to the depth of the experience, communication with other beings is almost universally reported as some form of thought-to-thought communication or exchange. Phrases they might use to help capture what they're saying is, it was telepathy, it was a voice from within, a nonverbal knowing, thought-to-thought communication. There's no words being said. This sharply contrasts, now listen to this, this is wholly distinct from all known forms of verbal and nonverbal communication. I mean, we do not communicate this way in life, ever. And yet thought-to-thought communication is highly persistent, very highly persistent and seen where there's communication present in any detail within NDEs. So let's take a look. Here's a few quotes. Heidi, there's no words spoken, but everything was communicated by thought. My questions were answered before I could finish my thought. Karen, he said to me telepathically, I have something very important for you. I thought, what is it? But I said nothing. He heard my thoughts and said, you'll know when the time comes. So people are just thinking, they're thinking, but it's being heard. Laura gives us some really interesting insight. He spoke to me without words, without a voice, and yet I had it clearly heard and understood every unspoken word. He said to me that I was in a different place, one in which communication was purely exchanged, heart to heart, soul to soul, so that there could be never a misunderstanding. And the study of memory is also a fascinating thing. What's unique about memory is the enduring quality of memory of NDEs. Individuals tend to recall precise detail of their NDEs decades later, even when other surrounding memories from that time period have faded or been completely forgotten. Take a look at a few quotes here. I can remember every detail of the experience as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The memory hasn't faded in the least, not like other memories have. Despite not being able to describe it, Faith says, I remember every single detail like it happened just now. Similarly, Andrew says, the memory of this event is not only crystal clear, but it remains intact, exactly as it happened. Every thought, word, image, action, feeling of this memory abides unchanged in my body and thoughts. I always remember it as if it happened today. All right, beings and landscapes. Near-death experiences often feature profound and vivid encounters with various beings and otherworldly landscapes. As we explore this area, we're going to take at face value the truth of what's being said, if only to understand how such a powerful encounter can affect people to the extreme point that they are known to do. So encounters with beings and landscapes typically include interactions with entities such as guides, angels, deceased relatives, spiritual authority figures, frequently Jesus, and sometimes an all-powerful light that many describe as God or a powerful divine presence. Encounters with loved ones do seem to emphasize bloodline relatives, though friends and even pets are encountered, which is good news for a lot of people. Strong emotional tones are seen here again. Overwhelming feelings of love, safety, comfort. But as should be obvious by the fact that they're sharing their stories with us, the encounters seem to always conclude, of course, with the realization that it's not their time. They're sent back. There's more work to do. They wake up, hence their return. In terms of landscapes, They include settings that range from the absence of landscapes, right? So such as the illuminated darkness akin to deep space that I think Bob was describing earlier, or more defined earthly type environments with lush fields, flowing rivers, even intricate cityscapes. In these earthly landscapes, though, in a similar way, the quality of them, the nature surpasses any descriptive efforts because visually, textually, and their just physical qualities are often more profound, more extreme, more vivid. Natural objects like grass, trees, animals may even demonstrate a heightened sense of life in ways that are completely foreign to us. Here's something interesting. The evidential characteristics of these encounters, when available, almost always involve access to information that would have been impossible. So again, how can we look at this from an evidential standpoint in terms of their consistencies? For the person experiencing it, they sometimes encounter family members or something that they've never encountered before, or something of their future that later comes to be. They might see a photograph after their experience of an individual that matches perfectly with those they saw during their NDE. And I love when those photographs are people at a younger age, despite the experiencer never having known that person when they were younger, such as a deceased grandparent. Okay, we're going to conclude this section with just listening to Bill. He has just a phenomenal way of describing this deeper part of the experience. It's a 4-minute video to describe his amazing encounters. Bill became a paramedic before moving into the jewelry business, doing trade shows all over the country. He contracted an illness, went to the hospital where he's discharged and told to immediately return if symptoms resurfaced. And that's where we pick up here in the video.
So I went back to the hotel room. That night, I physically remember hearing myself take my last breath. I left my body through this beautiful fluorescent glowing mist, hovering over my body, looking down upon myself. And when I recognized that body wasn't alive anymore, this beam came from behind me so bright, it lit up everything underneath me. And it drew me right into the gateway. This beautiful tunnel. The tunnel was made up of magnificent colors. And now I am starting to move. But I'm feeling this amazing feeling. I have a feeling like I never had before, a love. The love was so incredible that you actually become the love. Now you're in this light, you're part of this light, and I'm moving at what seems to me like the speed of light. No debris, nothing, just light, beautiful colors whizzing by me, going through me. And this love is growing stronger and stronger. By the time I get to my destination, I remember distinctively saying, I'm home. I'm finally home. I remember hearing a soft voice speak to me. And she says, yes, Bill, you're home in the light of God. And then she says, my name is Antonia. I am one of your guardians. And now I'm being greeted by spirits all around me, family, friends. And I remember mingling, talking, feeling love from everybody. I recognize them, they recognize me. It's all, everything is done through telepathy. There's no mouths at this point. There's no bodies at this point. They're beams of light. I'm still a mist at this time. After it seemed like a few minutes have passed by and I hear this voice, hello, Billy. When I heard that voice, that was my brother's voice. My brother, Peter, he was about 16 years older than me. My brother was around with me all the time while I was growing up, teaching me how to play ball and taking me to my ball games when I was in the baseball leagues and everything. He was just a wonderful, wonderful brother. And then it came out of nowhere. He wound up having liver cancer, and they told him he was going to have 4 or 5 months to live. And that devastated me. Now, I'm sure I know my brother's voice. When he said, "Hello, Billy," by this time everybody was calling me Bill in life. I was in my 40s, but I was Billy to him. And he says, "Hello, Billy." And I turned around and said, "Peter." And the embrace was almost unexplainable. It was like you were part of them, they were part of you.
Isn't that amazing? Encounters with beings and landscapes. It's not unusual at this level of depth in an NDE during these encounters that once one experiences a life review, it's just as it sounds, really. It's a review of your life. Typically, the life review is, I kind of like to outline it like this, as you see on the screen. Typically, it's an accompanied, emotional, and insightful review of an individual's life, experienced in a profound, multifaceted manner that highlights moral elements. So I would argue that this is the most important catalyst for change in someone's life if they experience it in an NDE, generally speaking. I mean, how would your behavior change? Think about this. If a camera crew was following you around 24/7, streaming every word and action to your loved ones, I have a feeling it would have a positive effect on your life. And take it deeper, because these individuals are saying that we're streaming our thoughts and intentions. And there's a scripture to that effect, right? Nothing that is said in secret, thought in secret, won't be shouted from the housetops, perhaps in a very real sense. But in this experience, during life reviews, individuals often describe being in the presence of unconditional love. That's really important. This loving presence is not judgmental in the life review, yet it creates an atmosphere where the person feels safe to reflect on their actions with honesty. I'm going to develop this idea a little bit more here. So while there's no judgment as we typically understand it, this environment of unconditional love informs how an experiencer will process their actions when they see it in a life review. Actually, I would argue that there is a heightened level of judgment, but that judgment is not coming externally per se, but rather internally as a self-judgment because of, let's call it, perfect love standing with you or all around you. How can we kind of understand this a little bit? Just as a child might feel shame or regret if they saw and reflected on poor behavior in the company of a loving parent. They may also feel pride, by the way, and joy if they saw and reflected on their good deeds with a loving parent nearby. Even if the loving parent says nothing, these emotions are going to reflect and come through them. Why? Because while they're not directly judging the child's understanding of who the parent is, their nature, their love, their sense of justice and equality for the siblings, so to speak, becomes an integral part of the emotional response that that child will have when watching the behavior together. So are you getting what's happening potentially? I'm developing this idea because it does impact people pretty powerfully. And the mere presence of such powerful beings of light exuding this divine love allows for a very intimate internal self-judgment without external condemnation. That's a very beautiful thing in the oneness reported in the afterlife, where the boundaries of self, you, me, others, not only become more blurred and united, but at the same time become more integral for the harmonious union reported in the afterlife, or perhaps the communion of the afterlife. There's a very consistent sense of this multi-consciousness theme, or experiencing multiple things at the same time. Again, foreign to the way we experience life, but in out-of-body experiences, it's not unusual for someone to report that they were viewing their body, as we saw earlier from above, while still feeling connected to the body below in some other sensory ways. In life reviews, near-death experiencers tend to review or view things on walls or screens that just materialize. Pastor Vern will speak to that a little bit later. But more importantly are the consistencies of these reports, right? We don't live life in this multi-conscious way, and yet it's frequently reported that people who review a life review or who go through a life review not only view their lives, for example, in this objective sense, watching it on a screen, but at the same time, they say they relive those moments from first-person perspective. And listen to this. They simultaneously experience the first-person perspective of the others they're interacting with. This brings a profound understanding, in my opinion, to the golden rule. Doing unto others as you would have them do to you. Because in this case, in a life review, you are not only watching yourself, but you are becoming yourself and becoming the other person in first person to feel what you're saying and doing and how it affects others. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because in this case, you do become one. Let's briefly listen to Rachel, who describes her life review in her NDE.
When I was 20 years old, I gave birth to my first child. It was a very traumatic labour, through which I lost a huge amount of blood, and I was required to have a blood transfusion. And within a couple of hours of the blood transfusion starting, I started to have a reaction. The next thing I knew, there was an oxygen mask on my face, and that's when I was just mentally thinking to myself, what's happening? And I noticed that my nails were turning blue, and that's about the point where I thought, oh, I'm dying. Pretty much straight after that, I'm going to say flying. I'm definitely going up, I'm going forward. There's a presence with me, and we're shooting up and forward in what I can only describe as a tunnel. We did that for a while, and then we stopped, and the scene completely changed. I was in a room without walls, without a ceiling or a floor, and yet it felt enclosed and personal. A big screen appeared, you could call it a screen, and it was playing my life. And I was watching it, and then I was reliving it. And I was in that moment, as if I just traveled back in time straight into that second. And with my new awareness and this perspective that was vastly different to the one I had while in my body, I was sort of judging myself. I was just exploring each moment with, how did I respond in that situation? Could I have done that differently? Was there a better, more loving approach to that situation? I would relive these heated arguments, feeling in the perspective of the other person who's at the brunt of my harsh words as I'm launching them, without real thought. And I would then stand in the other person's perspective, perhaps it was my mother or my father, and really feel how hurtful that was. And that stayed with me as well.
Powerful stuff. In the life review, once again, the boundaries between self and others dissolve, making it clear that others are, in a very profound sense, part of you, part of us. As we come towards the end here, I want to bring this into a Christian context. The idea of this unity repeatedly comes out in the teachings of Jesus, not just in the Golden Rule, but also in other places. In the Great Commandment, he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Again, giving perhaps a new perspective on that. And he extends it in a divine fashion when we're told that our good works of mercy and kindness to others are akin to good works and serving God himself. Truly, truly, whatever you do to the least of these, you do for me. The theological teaching of the Trinity itself, a distinct thing of Christian theology. It's been the target of so much debate and even ridicule in history. The idea that there's three persons and one God. What are you talking about? It's just nonsense, right? It doesn't make rational sense. And that's why people have made that observations or might see that. And yet it's been held as sort of a core claim for thousands of years. The belief that the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, but there's just one God. It's tough. Now realize the Holy Spirit is in each of us, because I'm trying to build the bridge here to what NDEers are saying. We become part of God in that sense. Jesus even prayed in the Gospel of John that we may become one with him as he was one with the Father, that they may become one with me as I am with you. Let that sink in a little bit. It seems in these NDEs, there's this oneness that's formed. We're able to see and be and experience multiple things at the same time. There's another verse that comes to me that says, you will know as you are known, suggesting that we will become one with God while retaining our individual personhood, just as Jesus perhaps. This is extraordinarily similar to the nature of unity and oneness that's so pervasive in NDEs. So, as you noticed, there is a link or a focus on more moral interior elements of our lives. So unlike earthly success, which often emphasizes fame, material gain, or those things we can visibly see, life reviews focus on the moral elements of our actions, even our internal thoughts and emotions behind the actions. That's what Rachel was saying. That's what NDEers say. I was reliving the moments, trying to see, exploring, how could I have done that differently? Rather than these quick emotional reactions that we're prone to, keeping the idea or sense of the divine within us, of God's love, of Christ's love within us, as we explore not only each moment in a life review, but in each moment as we interact with our brothers and sisters here on earth. This interior aspect and reflection of our lives takes precedence over worldly achievements, and it motivates a better alignment of who we are on the inside with who people think we are or what they see on the outside. So NDEers often kind of reframe their whole lives and their worldviews because of this experience. They know that's going to survive themselves, their self-consciousness. Their bodies are going to die unto dust, dust unto dust. This renewed understanding strongly impacts their moral compass because that becomes the priority. That's the shift in priority and actions that they have that reflect what's on the inside. Okay, and that brings us, so the life review is the most powerful catalyst, I believe, for change in someone's life. It shows us just how deeply we are watched and loved. And that is a good segue into the after effects. We're going to conclude with the after effects and the unique, profound transformations that are exhibited by individuals. They're characterized by an altruistic shift in priorities, as we were just talking about, emphasizing love, compassion, relationships. NDEers become more compassionate, more empathetic, less materialistic, and competitive. These effects are powerful, often extending over the remainder of their lives. I can only imagine most communities, churches, counselors who could only dream of reproducing these results. And yet it seems to happen so effortlessly through an NDE at a time when you wouldn't expect it. If for no other reason than the positive implications to improve the lives of people and civil society, that's why we need to study NDEs. This is why at NDERF, we believe the understanding of near-death experiences can literally change the world in solidarity with so many faith traditions that are an extension of the good news of that amazing love. We can work this together. The after effects before and after an NDE. First, let's remember that the reality of the NDE by the experiencer is not in question. There is nothing that we know of that can produce this change that you're seeing on the screen. In answers to the questions of our lives being meaningful and significant, something we want everyone to realize, right? 27% have that feeling before their NDE, 78% after their NDE. It's an incredible thing. An afterlife exists.
Wow.
God exists. I became greatly compassionate, greatly compassionate towards others. I did not fear death. I'm really stunned by this one. This can't be reproduced by any other experience. There's no drug experience or, teaching that can just have you lose your fear of death. And by the way, the loss of the fear of death is not because of some bravado, like a soldier dying for king and country. This is quite simply because experiencers believe they died or experienced the afterlife in a very real way that demonstrates to them there is no ultimate fear in it. More so, you see a tremendous reduction of fear in earthly life. So again, it's not just a study of what people are experiencing or how does that impact us, it actually affects us. Because if you feel more confident about where you're going and what the structure is like there, you will feel more confident in living your own life here. And that meaningfulness and significance comes through. I look at these numbers and I think of the potential. At Ender, we know by simply reading these accounts, they infuse change in people's lives to a degree by just internalizing the experience of others, as we do in life, right? We listen to others, we get motivational talks from others. So the potential here in conclusion is great. A retired neurosurgeon who became a pastor once asked me, how do these experiences impact the church? They have deep global implications. In faith formation, experiencers come to believe in life after death with love as the central theme. They come to believe in God. They come to believe in moral changes in their lives that tend towards the loving actions and altruistic behaviors that we discussed. Feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, giving care to the sick, and even in the day-to-day things we have to do, doing it perhaps with more honesty, the way we engage our work, our children, our spouses. But more than that, these findings could be critical for the medical sciences in the understanding of consciousness, resuscitation, and hospice and other areas of end-of-life care. There are implications in the social sciences. Currently working, I'm with a senior lecturer in sociology in the UK, and we're looking to develop a series to help bring this information into the scope of a wider range and study of sociology. But it can help, look, it can help psychologists, counselors, dealing with loneliness, despondency, grief, abuse, or issues of low self-esteem. And it'll help us too, because we can learn from it. How many times do we feel some of these things? All right. The study and discussion of NDEs is globally transformative. We call upon all those who have experienced the profound, the skeptics, the faithful, the curious to join us in this dialogue. And I appreciate you having me here today. With open hearts and minds, let's explore this vast landscape of human consciousness and spirituality. I believe the exploration is unmatched by any other in history. Together, we can move to uncover truths that lie at the intersection of real life NDE stories, real life sciences, and real life spirituality that are in all our best interests in a very profound way that's captured both in that golden rule we talked about and in NDE life reviews. I believe such a journey holds the potential to yield humanity's most significant breakthroughs yet, because it is ultimately a journey towards each other. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to declare us ready to go. Ready to go.
Vern.
Yeah.
It's yours.
Am I on?
Yes. We want to hear about your near-death experiences. We'll ask questions. We'll go back and forth and hopefully make this a much more interactive presentation moving forward.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, all. And Joseph, I want to tell you, I really appreciated your presentation so far. You sure primed my pump, I'll tell you. Very, very good.
Thank you.
To begin with, I would like to say this from my perspective about our motive for making this presentation. It will hopefully illustrate that the God that our religion tells us about and the God of reality that these NDEs demonstrate are one and the same. I think that's what we heard from Joseph as well. I also want to say that before I had my NDE, I was a very worldly person in a lot of regards. But one, I was very ambitious. I was grooming myself to be an author. And I had taken it very seriously. I put a lot of time in it. I eventually won a national short story contest. I was also a very accomplished amateur photographer. And I mention this because what it had really done for my mind, unknowingly to me when I had this NDE, it had kind of prepared me to take back visualizations that I experienced with the NDE. Because my mind, I had trained myself to create word pictures. And I had a very good memory as a result of this. So those two activities that I had, I was almost trained to be an observer, if you will, an acute observer. So with that said, as I considered sharing this NDE with you, I quickly realized that my regular rambling version was not going to work for this venue. What I did is I made some very concise, tight notes to cover the meat of what I experienced. A lot of details to it. It could enlarge this 5 times over. But this will be the meat, and I felt that any details that God wanted to be brought out would be brought out best in question and answer. So I'll proceed that way. With that said, my story must necessarily begin and end with this scripture verse found in the Bible in Psalms 50:15, where God says, "Call on me in the day of trouble, I will deliver you, and you shall honor me and glorify me." Now keep in mind, when I had my NDE, I had no awareness of that scripture. In 1976, I was a worldly, completely non-religious 35-year-old guy. I had been under a doctor's care for a few years, and complications with the medications I had been on prompted me to quit them. The doctor warned me it could be fatal. Regardless, with no death wish in mind, at the time, I really had no better option. Several months later, just home from work, having a beer, I was thinking about how long it had been since I was off the meds, and I was still doing well. Then a thought occurred to me in this precise way. I beat it. And once again, I considered the many trials of life I'd already gone through, thinking I had beat them all, and this was just one more, and I was one tough monkey. At that precise, exact moment, I experienced the worst convulsion I ever had. I completely overwhelmed as I doubled over, fell screaming in utter desperation, and unexplainably, "Oh God, oh Jesus." As though in answer to an unformed question, the memory of the doctor's voice from months before echoed in my mind. "Stop the medications and you'll die." I felt myself going through a tunnel of sorts and was ultimately deposited in a totally dark place. Somehow I knew I had arrived at the place of death. Initially, I felt wonderfully relieved, thinking all my troubles in life were over, and I had a bunch. But soon enough, I grew bored and restless. Then I heard a voice ask me if I wanted to get out of there. I recall thinking, well, I didn't want to stay there. Neither did I want to go back to the life I had left. I just took a gamble, really, and responded yes. Suddenly, a tiny star-like light appeared in the far distant darkness. but it grew real rapidly until it displaced all the darkness, and a man seeming of light himself stepped out of it. As he approached me, he said, "I love you." I've heard that all my life, and it's brought me nothing but trouble. I'll have no more of that. That was my reply. But when he said, "I love you" again, it touched my heart differently. And I asked, "Who are you?" "God," he answered. The bright light accompanied the man had diminished somewhat, and he looked more like you or I, about 6 foot tall, in good shape, bearded, shoulder-length hair, wearing a cool robe. Remember, this was 1976. I knew plenty of dudes that match that description. I was not particularly intimidated. Skeptically, I responded, "Sure thing. Well, if you are who you say you are, you should be able to answer some questions for me." "Ask," he answered, and I did. And with every answer he provided, I began to realize I was truly in the presence of God. And I remember thinking, I'm in real trouble now, and became extremely fearful. He sensed my discomfort and said something humorous, encouraging me to continue the conversation, which after a while got around to me asking about the meaning and purpose of life. As he delved into the answer, he asked if I would like to see heaven and hell. "Yes," I replied. He then beckoned to me and transported me in him, sort of like a child being carried by a pregnant mother. The first stop was hell. I knew I was being shown this not to hurt me in any manner, but to make me aware of it. There I was shown different levels and degrees of suffering, each worse than the last. At one point, I recall realizing I would have to capture a memory in practical terms to share what I had seen. This was the worst of hell. It was like feeling the pain of being burned all over your body eternally with no hope of relief. Happily, we traveled next to heaven, where behind the walls I could move at will by thought alone, by passing through seemingly material things. Quickly, I realized communication was through thought. There were no words spoken. I saw wondrous and marvelous things. Came a time when I knew my life was to be judged. There was a large group of many predeceased people I had known encouraging me, but I did not feel at all confident. In a darkened room, I sat in front of what we would now call a big screen TV monitor. Remember, this is 1976. No big screens back then. God, but not the one who had initially saved me from death, sat next to me. As my whole life before my eyes, I cringed at some of what I had done. God at one point patted me on the knee and said, "Don't worry, I would have done the same thing in your place," which put me at ease. When it was over, and I had evidently been allowed to remain in heaven, I didn't feel judged, but loved. God, the one I had now discerned as being Jesus, appeared again. This time, he was extremely weary. He asked that now I had seen heaven, was there anyone else I would like to join me there? I quickly thought of my 2 daughters and some close friends. But initially, when I thought of my wife, who I had been separated from for a few years, I omitted her. But then I realized even she would change for the better under the influence of heaven. In fact, anyone would. And at that moment, it was as though a dam burst in my heart, and I felt the love I had never felt before. I realized Jesus wanted everyone in heaven. I also realized then that Jesus had been a part of my life all along, and I would not be in heaven if not for him. I asked him if there was anything I could do to help, and he in return asked me what I would like to do. "I want to go back to earth and live as a Christian for you," I answered. "You can stay until the end. I will be coming soon. Tell everyone about me," he responded. As he transported me back to earth, it occurred to me to ask him for a job. He agreed, saying, yes, I will train you and make you a leader. The rest, as they say, is history. Important note here. I found myself wondrously healed, never again troubled by the symptoms that had killed me. After 8 years of study and internship, I was ordained as a minister in 1984 and have had a fulfilling and successful career. So here, as they say, is the rest of the story that I think makes this really interesting. Remember how we started this with the Bible verse, call on me at the day of trouble, I will deliver you, and you shall honor and glorify me. From the day I fell to my death in 1976 until this moment, 48 plus years later, that's exactly what's been happening. In the worst day of trouble I had seen in my life, why I called out, oh God, oh Jesus, I have no idea. Consider that the deliverance I experienced in what we're calling an NDE is the only reason that seemingly from one day to the next, I went from being a very worldly disco dandy of those days to someone who lives completely to honor and glorify God, and always will. Thank you.
Thank you, Vern. That, story is so deeply profound and consistent with what we hear with so many others. Can you imagine having any experience and realizing that my whole life's path has to change with no input, So I want to open it up for questions and answers here. I appreciate you giving us the time to go through that. Any questions?
We've got a question here.
Thank you.
On the earlier people you went through, it seemed like it was more or less just unspoken communication that was absorbed, and yet when Vern was speaking, it was as if it was actually having a conversation. Was that the same way that it was a conversation, but just sort of without words, or did you imagine yourself actually in a physical, verbal communication?
So I believe if you're asking, yes, the communication that is thought to thought is two ways. There's information being transmitted and received just like it would be verbally here. But in this world, our thoughts cannot be seen or read or heard. And so we have to articulate them. We have to make them physical, material in some ways. And we do that through sound waves when we speak, and of course, light waves when we write. So yes.
There's one other thing I'd like to say about that, Joseph. It's that when I was in heaven, it seemed as though, of course, I was used to speaking, but I wasn't used to the new method. And so I thought I had the option of thinking and then speaking as we do now. But I quickly realized I didn't, and I'd better be careful of my thoughts, because my thoughts was what were going to be heard. You see, here we have that option. We can think, well, who doesn't? We think one thing, we say another. This is very common. But no, you don't have that option. When I came back and going through some of my life school stuff, and I had to learn, I remember very early on going to church, and I don't know, there was somebody I badmouthed. I just remember that I just kind of casually, they weren't around, and I just badmouthed them. I don't even remember what it's about. But in the old life, that was a very common occurrence. And on a day or so later, I'm walking down the street and I see this person coming that I badmouth. Oh man, I'm embarrassed. I mean, I'm just incredibly embarrassed. It's like, I guess I thought I was back in heaven, they would have known. But, it taught me something. It's like, well, yeah, what's really going on in reality is it's that thought. The thought is much more important than what we might think. And very often, it's like, how are you? I'm fine. Well, come on. That's all kind of some superficial. It's not really what's going on in our minds. So I guess that's my point. In heaven, you don't have that frivolity. It's right there. It's like what you're thinking is what you're getting.
That's a good point, Vern, that you mentioned. I'm just going to share this one slide that we had, the full slide. Notice Karen. He said to me telepathically, I have something very important for you. So she responded, I thought, what is it? But I didn't say anything yet. He heard my thoughts. You'll know when the time comes. So what Vern was trying to say is that he had this idea that he could still think and speak. Remember when I said when you're first in this existence of the afterlife, you really don't even know. You think and you process things as you would when you're a human being. But you quickly realize these added abilities that we talked about in enhanced consciousness. And that's what you see here with Karen. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Good that we're fleshing this out. It's really important to understand it because you can see the deeper aspects of the experience.
One more thing I might just add at this point, I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago, for the first time in my life, we took a vacation to New York City, which was very new and different. And having to be a good time in that city. We were there for about a week, stayed in the Waldorf Astoria, had quite a time. It was a whole brand new experience for me who'd lived in the desert all my life. Heaven had a similarity. I'm not talking about New York City, but I'm talking about the newness of it. When I went through that experience, it was all new to me. Everything was new to me. But, in that way, I was still just me, the conscious person. Whether I was in the body or out of the body, God knows. But it wasn't any different in terms of my mentality. It was a new place. I had the experience of something new occurring to me there. I think anybody would.
I'm going to share you the deepest probably thing I've taken away that's affected me personally and has shaped my life. Imagine your thoughts in the same way that your voice is. Your voice has sound waves, and that's what transmits the thought to someone else. I imagine the thought as, well, for lack of a better term, as a spirit wave that can be heard just like a sound wave can. In fact, in many NDEs, people who have out-of-body experiences claim to see what someone else is thinking. And one of Dr. Parnia's, one of the leading researchers, doctor affiliate, also claimed when his first day as a doctor, someone arrested on him. And after he recovered, he told him a thought he had about another resident who was supposed to be at the hospital but wasn't. And so again, this idea that our thoughts are the substance of spirit, and in fact, the very nexus between the physical and the spiritual. Yeah. So yes, any other questions? And again, that can be developed quite a bit further.
We've got another question.
I'm confused about the time frame. Like all of the things that you experienced, it seems like that took a long time. And you weren't dead that long, right?
I have no idea, to be honest with you. I lived alone at the time. This happened, one evening.
You were by yourself? You were not taken to hospital?
I was completely by myself, yeah.
Okay.
This is frequently asked. I mean, people who have NDEs could go on for hours seemingly about what happened in their NDE, and you're making a good observation. Well, that's impossible because you had died for only 3 minutes or 1 minute or an hour as somebody.
But you're out of time. We're not existing in time then.
Exactly. And one of the beautiful things that most people actually don't know comes from a fact of science, believe it or not. It's called time dilation. And without getting too deep into it, Einstein showed that the faster you move, the slower time moves. Most people don't know this. It's one of those things where, yeah, right, the Earth is round, sure, because we see the Earth as flat. But in reality, when this, which I believe relates to the theory of relativity, was tested in the 1970s, they put an atomic clock on a 747, I believe it was, and flew it around for whatever time period and came back. And sure enough, the mechanical clock, mind you, a mechanical clock, was slower than the one that was on the ground, suggesting that time actually slows down the faster you go. And briefly, there's something called the twin paradox, where theoretically in science, if you get on a spaceship and you fly around near the speed of light for a few minutes and you come back, if you had a twin brother, he would be infinitely older than you when you return. So the idea that, yes, time may make it seem impossible, but there's something very important there about how time changes in the afterlife.
Yeah, absolutely.
What, we have another question?
I'm curious about non-Christian experiences. We seem to equate heaven and hell, that sort of thing. And I'm curious about folks who are not Christian, what their experience.
Well, that was me. I was not a Christian.
Well, but you were raised in an environment where the predominant religion is Christianity. What about Hindus that are raised in India? What about any of the animists? What
Native
about
American.
Native Americans? What about Buddhists? What about Jews?
That's the beauty of the experience. So this is a great question, because this is where we're hitting this is where the rubber hits the road. Non-Western NDEs is something that we not only receive here at NDERF, but we classify as such. And the structure of non-Western NDEs is effectively identical to NDEs in Western culture, which is obviously predominantly Christian. So the idea that, but I don't want to take away from what Pastor Vern's saying too. The short answer is non-Western NDEs, or those that come from other people, have the same feelings of peace, light, love, etc., that we do here in the West.
We got to follow up.
Yeah, just real quickly, I am curious about people of other faiths or other faith traditions, if they still see a male figure.
Yeah, interesting. I don't have data on it because it's not researched, but I've effectively reviewed all of our accounts. And sometimes there's very specific gender qualities that are told to us by the NDE. Some people will say there's genderless, there are no gender, etc., and other people will say no, there's specific gender. Be careful about sort of the idea of making it too physical. You know, they tried to pin Jesus down in that story when he said, well, you know, if so-and-so marries and then dies, and then she marries her brother and he dies, and he marries her brother and he dies, well, you know, whose spouse is she going to be in heaven? And what Jesus was trying to say is, look, you don't understand it. The power of God's very different. Your whole nature changes. There is no marrying and giving in marriage in heaven. And so in a similar sense, I think gender would fall into that sleeve, in that, well, there might be gender coming out, but maybe it's not what we think it is.
Thank you.
And again, just a quick follow-up here. Bob just came to me. Bob saw those starlights, right? He saw beings as stars, as lights. So the bodily shape, I don't think, is a secondary thing, perhaps. I mean, Jesus materialized, apparently, in a closed room. So the idea of material things that can disappear and appear in a physical form, I think restrict matter to a sort of lesser place. Any other questions?
One more? A couple more. But please, I saw his hand.
I see an online individual.
I was just thinking, we keep talking about seeing Jesus and all, and do other non-Christians, whatever. But Jesus has only been around for 2,000 years, right? So people who had near-death experiences before Jesus, wondering, did they see Jesus before he was born? I don't know, just a thought. Just throwing that out there.
No, I know it's I think these are all very relevant and good questions. Again, when we think about the eternal nature, I want to make sure we put it above the physical nature. So if Jesus as an entity or spirit, as the Son of God, existed, obviously he wouldn't have been in the physical Jesus form that he was when he lived on earth, right? So you're making a good point. There's something in theology called a Christophany. And a Christophany is sort of a pre-physical manifestation of God. I think, and whoever out here is more Vern, whoever has more information, but I believe it was Daniel or somebody that saw, there's no way I'm going to pronounce those three people. They said a light appeared and it looks like the Son of God. The Son of God. Okay, maybe that was Jesus. I think sometimes we see Abraham's discussion with Melchizedek as this great priest, because Jesus is often sort of lined up or parallel to him. I think a lot of NDEers would say they existed beforehand. A lot of people say they're going back home. So my name is Joseph. If I go back to eternity and I say, oh my gosh, this feels really familiar. I've been here before. Well, how could that be? This is my first time coming here, if I'm talking in the sense of time, after my existence as Joseph, the human being.
I would just like to say this, is that there will always be a mystery between us and God. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it's going to be. It's the way it is. And there'll always be something. We'll not get an answer from it. You'll just have to accept it. And it's like, I don't know anybody who could say they really know everything about the Bible, but we get what we need out of the Bible. And I think this is what I see the delightful part about Life School, what we're doing here this morning. We're learning something. We're learning something about it. We're moving forward a little bit, maybe, but we'll take something away from this that'll help us that way.
Okay, I've got a little story that I think Pastor Vern will enjoy hearing. In your conversation, you said you don't have to eat. And I taught kindergarten, and one day I asked this little girl, I said, you haven't been here that long. What can you tell me about heaven? And she said, it's just like this, but you don't have to eat.
It's again going back to this idea that Vern was saying, that the eternal is so much more powerful and extraordinary that we can't even conceive of it. And I begin to put earth in its place. I say it this way: by knowing the afterlife, it subordinates this life. By knowing the new earth, it subordinates this earth. But that nature of the subordination is not one in which we would throw this earth out, but it's an understanding of its fragility. And so something to be cared for from Vern.
One more?
My near-death experience was totally different. I was 10 years old and I had pneumonia, and I was laying in bed in my bedroom and I was suffocating. And I totally felt at peace. I just totally felt at peace, and the Lord spoke to me, and he said to me, I can take you home right now with me, or you can cough. And I coughed, and that was it. I woke up and I was fine.
Wow.
And I felt at peace, and I'm not afraid of dying. And that was as far as I went with my near-death experience.
That's the profound answer.
Tunnels, I didn't see light, I didn't see anything like that. But he gave me a choice. He says, you can go with me or you can cough. So how many people experience the very light version of it?
More than you think. There is an NDE scale that's used to measure the depth of an experience. And there's no doubt that much more of them are scored lower because they don't have as many elements that are scored on that scale in their NDE. However, the deeper the experience goes, the less uncertain these issues are. So, for example, I think I showed the belief in the afterlife. The highest scoring NDEs are, there's nobody who doesn't have a strong belief in the afterlife. Literally, in this study that most recently was published with 834 cases. So, yes, there is, and the superficiality of it doesn't seem to make a difference in terms of its impact. I'll share something I haven't shared. I had an experience myself. It's why I do what I do. It wasn't a near-death experience. It was a spiritually transformative experience on a day I should have died. And I chose to dive into it. Can this stuff be true? I started opening up a Bible. Is this true? I went back to the science literature. I went to the archaeological books. And so I think it's what you do with the knowledge you have that is maybe even more important than the experiences that you have.
And I have to tell you this one last thing. When I went to heaven 48 years ago, I was one kind of person, exactly the person that I left the earth with at that time. I am a completely different person now. You take me back to heaven now, it's going to be a totally different experience for me. My relationship with God is just like this, and has been for a long time. Back then it was, whoa, miles apart. So our life here is really very important. It really is. I think when we think of it that way, is that we're here to make this progress in our relationship with God.
And there's no difference in that message and the message that the church teaches, I believe, which is essentially to find God. It's not to find God and, dispose of everything else. It's to find God and enrich everything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amen.
I know we're coming at the end of our allotted time, but any last questions?
I think all you're going to get's a big amen.
So I'd like to end with a quote and then a blessing, which is traditional in our session meetings. When the divine is located within matter, within the natural world, and within human nature, rather than outside or beyond, the whole of life becomes a mystical sanctuary. All things and all people are embodiments of the divine, a mysterious web of subjects requiring relationship. That perceptive is the sole basis of ethical behavior. It informs our attitudes, our behavior, and our choices. And we send you off with this blessing. It comes from the Torah. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may we all live in such a way that this day fulfills its promise. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
As I breathe my last breath, I saw a light. In that moment, time stood still. Near-death experience, a journey profound, life-changing moment, my soul unbound, transcending the physical, reaching for the divine. It found in wisdom within me to shine. I saw my life flash before my eyes. All the joy, the pain, the truth and lies. A second chance, a renewed sense of purpose. I've been reborn, my spirit anew. Near-death experience, a journey profound, life-changing moment, my soul unbound, transcending the physical, reaching for the divine, forever transformed in this moment I shine. Near-death experience, a journey profound, life-changing moment, my soul unbound, transcending the physical, reaching for the divine, forever transformed in this moment.